Welcome to this follow-on tutorial to share with the community the progression of Blender cheat sheets and how newbies and some Blender users out there will find some great functionality from this add-on. If you want to find this add-on, please visit GitHub and look at my handle deaddogdown, and you can download a couple of the add-ons that I've provided to the Blender community free of charge, GPL version 2 for life. So by now we're going to get back into the end panel and going to be visiting object origin and why this is very important for newbies to get their heads around 3D language and these principles. That you could call them motifs, concepts, principles, ideas. How do we create a 3D world? So each of these sections is very important for you to grasp. So in the last tutorial we covered the very brief outline of world origin and what that means with a bit of a clunky explanation. I don't claim to be a PhD in 3D language, but I've been doing this long enough that I know that there's some very key principles that you have to understand so that you can design properly. So let's get into this. Object origin. What is that in relation to? If you look at everything inside of your scene right now, there's actually only one thing inside of this scene right now that depicts the object origin. Can you guess what that is? And I'm going to give you 5 seconds for this, and then I'll give you my answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In the scene, the object origin is represented by that tiny little orange dot in the middle. It's not the 3D cursor, it's not the object itself, it's not the light, it's not the camera, it's not the grid, it's not even the world origin. It is a point in the middle of a specific geometry of the selected object. So I'm going to select this, I'm going to duplicate this and move this away. And now, what do you notice? Where has the object origin moved to? Now, curiously, it looks like it's moved to this box. If I click on this box, the object origin will always highlight relative to the object that I've selected. So let's see what happens when we click 2 boxes. Now you see, oh, the object origin is highlighted for this box and this box. So just a simple way to remember this: when you click on a box, when you select a box, its origin will highlight, or where you last left off. And if you select more than one box, both of their individual origins will select. This also means to say that they are decoupled from each other, very strictly speaking, because another box's origin must always generally stay true to itself, and its origin is at the center of its geometry. If you look at this very carefully, that little object origin is always staying true to the box. It doesn't drift away unless at the advanced stages of your modeling you set the object origin to be somewhere else. Now, I've included in this as well this little indicator to show you when you've got something selected or not, because this cannot work unless you've got an object selected. I'm going to now undo what I've done here just to reduce the scene. Okay, back at our starting point again, and let's get into this. Some of these are duplications in other sections, and this is simply because it's very important to understand what object origin functions are. And these are all the functions that I could find related to the manipulation only of object origin. And those duplications are very useful for you because then you see the relationship between these sections and the relationship between functions. There is always a do and an undo, a forward action and a reverse action. When you can't see that flow, then the language gets very obscure. And so later on in this specific section, we'll be going over the inverse pairs, the do and undo relationship of certain functions that are related to the object origin. So, object origin to world 0. I'm going to take this object and I'm going to move it slightly off on the side. And what do you think will happen when I click on this button, object origin to world 0? I'll let you do it first, and then in 3 seconds I will give you my answer. 3, 2, 1. I click the button, and what should happen is the object origin of the object I've selected snaps to world origin that we spoke about in the last tutorial, but the object geometry stays where it is. Now, again, this is very useful in a certain setting. Let's say, for instance, I press R and Z. It's going to start rotating, but how's it going to rotate? Is it not going to rotate around the Z axis? So now I can apply animations and things like that if I want to spin something around an offset of that object. If I grab around the X, now it's going to, rotate around the X. If I rotate around the X, I can now, with that offset, get some pretty funky mechanics. Okay, the next one is, let's move on to object origin, origin to center of mass. Now, there comes a time where you've set your object origin to be somewhere else other than the center of the object that you're working on, and you need to get it back because the scene is not behaving or your object is not behaving. So what do? Basically, you're going to click origin to center of mass, and your object origin snaps straight back to the center of that mass. And you can verify that by middle mouse wheel drag around and see, yeah, it looks like it's in the center of mass, which means it probably is. There's no ways to mathematically find this out because we're working in Blender, which is more of a creative tool. It's not an engineering tool, but we know that the devs at Blender have done a very good job not to put too much mathematics into this exposed to the user. Okay, the next one is origin to bounding box center. Bounding box, I don't know how to show this in Blender, but basically every object has a bounding box. You could almost say that if you had to, let me do this, go into wireframe mode, that would be its bounding box. Minimum and maximum height and depth, its minimum, maximum left and right, forward and back. That is a bit of a mouthful, but I'm not going to worry about trying to get this absolutely perfect. I'm just here to share my add-on so I can get back to my game design. If I go back into my shaded viewport or my material viewport, origin to bounding box center. I'm going to move this object origin back to world center or world 0, and I'm going to now click origin to bounding box center. But now, instead of that object being there, I'm going to move that object there. Do you notice how when you've offset your object origin and you move your box, the object origin moves with it, but in relation to it. This is very important to understand because you're going to think that you can move your box and your object origin won't move. That's going to confuse you a little bit. If I now click origin to bounding box center, what should happen is basically almost the same as origin to center of mass. But center of mass and bounding box is not the same thing. If you have got an object defined with a mass, Blender should be doing calculations behind the scenes to figure out where that center of mass is. It'll pin that object origin to the center of the mass, even though it might not technically be the center of the geometry or the center of the bounding box. Okay, another one that I felt was very useful to add to Blender, and this is not part of Blender, but now it is object origin to bottom of object. And I'll be sharing a little bit later in some of the other functionality why this is a very useful little tool. Because humans, we live on floors and we live on the ground. We live on a plane under our feet. And so it's sometimes very useful to have a way to snap that origin to the bottom of the box. So I'm going to click that now, object origin to bottom of object. And straight away, I've now got something where I've got a little bit of added functionality that is quite intuitive when you think about how you're going to use this in future. I'm not going to tell you how to use it, but you're going to find that when you start using this, it's a little bit of sweetness that's most welcome. I'm going to move on to inverse pairs and show you what this means. Object origin to 3D cursor, we already know what that means. Now, it doesn't matter where the object origin is. It doesn't have to be strictly in the center of the object. Wherever that object origin is, if I click object origin to 3D cursor, you'll notice that it looks like a repeat. And yes, it is a repeat because 3D cursor is only 3D cursor related functions. And object origin is only object origin related functions. This is to help you to develop the language. Object origin to 3D cursor. The object origin snaps to wherever the 3D cursor is. I'm going to move it again. Object origin to 3D cursor. Move my mouse, object origin to 3D cursor. Then I'm going to put my object origin to world center or world 0 or global 0. I'm going to now click object 3D cursor to object origin. What will happen? Will my 3D cursor snap to the object origin or back to the box? Let's have a look. 3D cursor to object origin. Quite simple. Very predictable. Everything should be deterministic. Everything should be very predictable. Everything should be very flat and linear in the usage of your tools. You're the one who turns the usage of that tool into something creative. The next one is object origin to object geometry. I'm going to click that now. And you see it's basically doing something similar to origin to center of mass or origin to bounding box center. Center of mass, bounding box center, and object geometry all kind of look exactly the same until you start getting into the deeper and advanced techniques of modeling. And then object geometry to object origin. Now the only way for me to show you this is I'm going to set my object origin to world 0, global 0, and I'm going to now click object geometry to object origin. All of these are big mouthfuls, and it's very good for you to get to terms with these phrases. These terms are very important for you to use, and if you use only part of a word, if I had to erase the word behind here, origin, and you only saw the word object, you'd get very confused immediately. If I erased the first half of the word object and I only show you the word origin, you have got no idea what I am referring to. So you'll notice that many times terms are double qualified. 3D cursor, world origin, object origin, object mode, edit mode. These double qualified terms are to help you not lose your way. So if I now click on object geometry to object origin, what do you think will happen? I'll let you do it first, and then in about 3 seconds I'll give you my answer. 3, 2, 1. And if I click on the button, what should happen is the geometry should snap to wherever the object origin is. I'm going to show you that again. Wherever the object origin is, object geometry to object origin, I'm moving the geometry to wherever the origin is. So in this last little roll off to this tutorial, I'm going to set this back to origin to bottom of object, just because I think that for those of you out there who like Blender, this little quick button is very useful, and you're going to get a bit of a kick out of it at the right time when you figure out how to use it. Okay, this is basically a wrap on Blender cheat sheets, another tutorial to work through the basic functionality of this. I'm not going to go in deep because you're going to have to learn to play with these tools. I wrote all of these tools, I've tested all of these tools, I've played with all of these tools, and they're helping me get a lot more fluent with using Blender and the way that Blender thinks. Please feel free to support this channel and to support me. Um, I am an independent game developer, and this is self-funded. And these tools I am releasing with the vision to keep them free for life, GPL version 2. Feel free to use them how you wish, and share alike. You'll never have to pay for it, and you'll never have to find it behind a paywall. This is my way to contribute back to the Blender community and for newbies coming into 3D language for the first time, and to help you get a little bit of a fast track. And not fast as in rush, 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 rush. You've got to slow yourself down. You've got to be doing your small practices every day. When you start up a 3D session every day because you want to start modeling, spend the first 5 minutes doing these practices, getting the tools working. Learn how to move something, learn how to roll something. 5 minutes is not going to kill you. It's actually going to lay down muscle memory that's very important for you to have to understand how Blender works and how Blender cheat sheets works. And then once you've done your 5 minutes, then reward yourself with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and then go into your modeling session. You will underestimate the value of just 5 minutes laying this down every day, learning how to do certain things and learning how to get to grips with this now exposed functionality that previously you were forced to brute force memorize. So this is my payback to the Blender community for releasing a very cool Blender program where I can do my 3D creation and I can keep my workflow 3D creation centric and in a very nifty cheat sheets that's right in front of me so that I can find my way at any moment in time without having to try to remember what that shortcut was. Hope that you like this one. Blender Cheat Sheets is free for life on GitHub. Dead Dog Down. Look it up and you can find the other add-ons. In the next tutorial, we're going to be going into primitives, which most of you should know, but it's just neatly exposed. And I will see you in the next tutorial. Have an awesome day.